And that brings us to the final topic in this lecture. If you've lasted this long, congratulate yourselves. Maybe go and have a little bit of stretch, get a drink of water or something. But what we're going to look at now is how marine organisms adapt to life in the ocean. Because you can imagine living in an environment that's wet, the oxygen is dissolved in the water. You have to get that oxygen out. You might be subject to changes in temperature, salinity, changes in pressure. How do marine organisms, what adaptations have they made to live within the ocean? And there's a whole list of them right here, and I'm going to go through these over the next 40 slides, I think. The first thing we should look at is how do marine organisms avoid sinking? Think about it. You jump into a pool of water, you have to either swim or try to actively float, tread water in order to prevent yourself from sinking to the bottom. So how do fish do this? How do other marine organisms do this? Because imagine to do that, it's an extreme expenditure of energy, and if you expend energy, that means you have to go out and find more energy, you have to go out and hunt. So you want to try to conserve energy. Conserving energy, reducing the requirements for food is sort of the name of the game here. So what a lot of fish do is many fish have either a rigid gas container or a gas-filled swim bladder, sort of like expandable sac, almost think of it as a balloon, that allows them to rise, to sink, or to basically hover in water. What they do is they achieve neutral buoyancy, and when they achieve neutral buoyancy, they're expending very small amounts of energy to sort of sit there and hover within the water. One of the things we have to remember is that air is 800 times less dense than water. So if these fish can get some air, oxygen within their bodies, that's going to allow them to basically sit or float within the water column. We'll look at some of the methods by which they do this over the next few slides. We are not going to discuss organisms that have a rigid gas container. If you are interested in that, look up a nautilus. Instead, we're going to take a look at organisms that have a gas-filled swim bladder. These swim bladders are really useful in helping fish and other organisms maintain neutral buoyancy or position within the water column. It's not present in all fish. Fish that are active swimmers, we may not see a swim bladder in, but it is present in a good number of fish. And basically think of a swim bladder as a balloon. You blow up a balloon, you add oxygen into that balloon, it's going to float, it's going to get bigger, you let the air out of the balloon, it kind of shrinks down. Same sort of principle with a swim bladder. So we have actually an image of a real life swim bladder up in the upper right of the slide here. What we see is that the fish is able to relax the muscles of the bladder. As these muscles relax, the bladder gets larger, oxygen diffuses into it, the fish feels lighter, and it's going to float upwards. If the fish wants to move downwards, what happens is it tightens the muscles around the bladder, it basically squeezes, the oxygen is diffused out of that swim bladder, and then the fish is going to sink. It feels a little bit heavier, it's increasing its overall density, and it's going to sink a little bit within the water. And finally, fish can achieve neutral buoyancy, where they appear to either hover or float weightless in the water. And what happens there is the bladder muscles are going to start to tighten until it reaches a point where that fish maintains that neutral buoyancy. There are two different types of swim bladders. There's type A and type B. Type A, what we see is there's a duct that connects the esophagus. So this is, when you breathe in your mouth, air and even food and stuff will travel down your esophagus. What happens in type A is that the esophagus is connected to the swim bladder. So by the fish using its mouth, gulping, or it appears to be gulping for air, it's able to rapidly add or remove gas, once again, dissolved gases within the ocean water, into its swim bladder. So this fish is able to very quickly ascend in the water and very quickly descend in the water just by opening its mouth and moving air in or out. The other type of swim bladder, though, is type B. And what we see is we don't see that ductwork. We don't see that connection between the esophagus and the swim bladder itself. So here we have to rely on the interchange of gas within the blood. Blood's flowing through this whole system. Blood carries oxygen with it. That oxygen is going to get diffused into the swim bladder. So we see a very slow addition or removal of gas within the swim bladder, which means that with these fish, there's certain physiographic changes that occur, or physiological changes that occur when that fish is rapidly brought up into lower, shallower water, or if it's brought down into increasingly deeper and deeper water. And we'll see what happens when we go to the next page. What sort of happens when that swim bladder experiences a rapid pressure change? This is what happens when you bring a fish with a type B swim bladder up to the surface very rapidly. We're looking at here a fish known as a snapper or a rockfish. The fish on the left, this is what it looks like normally if you bring it to the surface slowly. So let's say you're fishing, you catch this fish, you don't reel it in very, very quickly, but you slowly bring it up to the surface. This allows times for gases to diffuse out of its swim bladder or diffuse into its swim bladder. What we see on the right is something called barotrauma, and this is what happens when these fish that have this type B swim bladder are brought very rapidly up to the surface. They expand rapidly and their internal organs are extruded from their body. We see their eyes bulging out, and that's because what happens is the gases that help maintain the where the fish is positioned in the water column, even gases within its blood or tissue, expand faster than can be naturally expelled. We're bringing up to areas of lower pressure so they can expand because there's less pressure as a result. And we get overinflation of the swim bladder, and this is sort of what we see as a result. And then there are other organisms that don't even rely on swim bladders. These are animals that just float. They're less dense than seawater. Once again, zooplankton, Greek for wandering animals, are an example of a floating organism. No swim bladders there, like this jelly here, which you'll find out is a member of the zooplankton. They just float in the water column and drift with ocean currents. And once again, that's because their overall body density, they're still less dense than the surrounding seawater. Another way that fish can maintain their position in the water column is by swimming, by active swimming. So they're constantly swimming. And we can actually see different types of swimming. We have sustained swimming. This is nonstop swimming for greater than 200 minutes. So this fish swims for like hours at a time. We have prolonged swimming. This is swimming bouts of swimming that last anywhere between 15 seconds and 200 minutes. And then we have burst swimming. And burst swimming we quite often associate with, actively hunting for food. So it's swimming that lasts less than 15 seconds, like going out and boom, go out and catch that fish and come back. The active swimmers were rapidly seeing sustained swimming and prolonged swimming there. A lot of the reasons why they can do this active swimming, why the sustained swimming, has to do with their fins and what their fins do, especially their tail fins. And we'll talk about that over the next few slides. So here we have a picture of a basic generic fish. Nothing special here, but it shows the location of all the fins. And the fins, especially the tail fin or the caudal fin is what it's termed as, are really important in fish, especially in the active swimmers. So caudal fin, tail fin of the fish, this is what generates thrust, helps propel that fish forward. Very powerful part of the fish's body. We have the pelvic and the pectoral fins. These are usually paired, so we have one of each on sort of opposite sides of the fish's body. They help sort of steer the fish through the water. It helps maintain balance within the water. And then we have the dorsal and the anal fin, so the dorsal on the back of the fish. This is sort of, that's the fin that you'll see in the shark appearing out of the water. The anal fin, these help the fish maintain stability. What we're going to take a look at are the caudal fins, the tail fins. And there's 5 different types of caudal fins, and all of these play a role in how that fish will move through the water. So here we have examples of the 5 different types of caudal fins. Number 1 is a rounded fin. So remember, look at the tail fins here and take a look at the shape of them. A rounded tail fin is very flexible. It allows the fish to accelerate. It allows the fish to maneuver at slow speed. So you can take these big sort of slow sweeping turns within the water. That's the first type of tail fin we have. The second one, we see it in that, it looks like a little parrotfish there, is a truncate fin. Truncate fin we see present on even faster fishes. It's a little bit more flexible, not quite as flexible as the rounded fin, but still gets the job done. Allows the fish to propel themselves better through water. Remember, all that tail fin does, especially the way it moves, will really help move that fish through the water. The third type of tail fin we see is forked. We can see it in the fish in number 3 there. So now it's just sort of like one mass of tail fin. We see sort of 2 points to it, an upper part and a lower part. Basically, it does the same thing as what we see in the truncate tail fin. Seen on slightly faster fish. Flexible, might not be able to turn as readily as what we see with the rounded tail fin. And then we get to the tail fins 4 and number 5. These are ones that are found on fish that move fast. Number 4, the lunate tail fin. I think that's a tuna that we're looking at there. We see this on very fast moving fish. Excellent in terms of propulsion. Not very good for maneuvering. So if you want to be able to turn on a dime, this is not the tail fin that you want. It's very rigid. It's not very flexible, but that allows that fish to maintain great speeds throughout the water. If you look at it too, it's very symmetrical. So the upper part of that tail fin is similar in size and shape to the lower part of the tail fin. Finally, we get tail fin number 5 here, the heterocircle tail fin, or the heterocircle tail fin. Once again, we see it here in the shark. You can see that it's asymmetrical. The lower portion is considerably smaller than the upper portion. This helps provide lift. It helps, you see these videos sometimes, or Shark Week on TV, and you see these pictures of these sharks leaping out of the water. This is a shape of fin that helps produce that. But it's totally useless for maneuvering within the water. So once again, you can't turn on a dime if you have this particular type of fin. As I said in the previous slide, that lunate-shaped caudal fin is excellent if you are a fish and you want to go fast. We see it in fish species such as the tuna family. These are one of the fastest animals in the ocean. They can travel up to speeds of about 75 kilometers an hour. They migrate yearly from California to Japan, so they're able to travel a distance of almost 9,000 kilometers. What do they do with this? How do they travel so fast? So the tail fin is one of these reasons why. The way it moves, and we'll talk a little bit about how these tail fins work in a minute in the next slide, helps it propel very quickly through the water. Once again, not very flexible. It's not going to be able to turn very quickly or turn on a dime, but allows this fish to travel fast. Other adaptations allow these fast-moving fish to swim so quickly. They can retract their other fins. So basically, they tuck their fins into their body. They're more aerodynamic. Their eyes kind of, in a sense, I don't want to say glaze over, but the eyes form a smooth surface. But what we see there's some drawbacks to this. They have to swim continuously or they will suffocate. They need to continuously swim to get oxygen passing through their body or passing through their gills, so they can always constantly get that intake of oxygen. They have to be swimming in order to do this. The other thing is being able to swim fast comes with a price. They have huge energy requirements. They have to eat at least 25% of their body weight every day in order to be able to maintain the speeds at which they swim at. So this is a huge thing. This can be an issue if you're a tuna. You need to always have food available or be finding food in order to sort of maintain your tuna lifestyle. The other downside with this increased energy requirements, you are more prone to overheating. I'm not getting into the details of how fish swim, but what we know is that within a fish's body, there are packages of muscle tissue attached to the vertebrae, and these are known as myomeres. So the myomeres help the fish's body actually curve from front to back when swimming. And that curving, that sort of fishing or, that swimming through the water motion that you can associate with fish comes from the contraction. So you bring those myomeres in and then you relax them. And that's what results in the swimming motion that we see with fish. If you want to further look at this, there's a link once again to a video here, and you can take a look at that video and study how fish use the myomeres to swim through the water. So how do sharks do this? As I said a couple of slides ago, we see sharks with a heterocircle tail there, and they seem to be able to leap out of the water. And in this case here, I think he's catching a poor, unsuspecting bird or seal. What do? How does this happen within a shark? We'll revisit sharks in Module 11, but very quickly, how do these sharks maintain this lift? How do they achieve this lift out of the water? Well, we see a couple of things within sharks. First of all, in some of the sharks, we have no swim bladder. So they have to either swim or they sink. So they're active swimmers. We say that if we look at a shark's body plan, the body plan is ideal for allowing it to be pushed or push itself out of the water, to propel itself out of the water. It has a body that's wing-shaped. That helps. But it also has its pectoral fins. And what happens is the pectoral fins push the water both downwards and backwards. And this helps to propel the fish or the shark forward. It also keeps the tail up, and what happens as the tail goes up, the head tends to go down. But to counteract this, if we look at the pectoral fins, they're actually angled. So this allows the head to remain up, even though there's these forces that want the tail to go down, or the tail to go up and the head to go down. So it has these angled pectoral fins that pushes water backwards and downwards and helps lift the shark upwards. It also has body skeleton that's not made up of bones. It's made of cartilage, so very lightweight. If you look at its liver is full of lightweight lipids. Lipids are another form of fat. So these help maintain its buoyancy within the water. And then its tail with this heterocircle fin, these asymmetrical lobes, allows that fish, a very rigid tail, to basically push itself up and propel itself out of the water. Not all species of sharks can do this, but there are some that have the idealized body plan that they can propel themselves out of the water. Well, on the subject of sharks and how sharks leap out of the water and catch poor unsuspecting seals or birds or penguins, let's talk about how most other marine organisms obtain nutrients. So the majority of time as a marine animal is spent trying to get food, and there's many different methods that are used to get food. It depends on if you're an invertebrate or you're a vertebrate, if you're attached to substrate in the ocean floor, or if you're a part of the nekton. It's going to depend on, all of that's going to play a role in how you get food. We see these different methods can be very passive. You basically sit there and wait for food to be brought to you, or can they be very active? You actively go out and hunt for the food that you want to eat. So the first type of food that, or sort of method of obtaining nutrients that we're going to look at is something called filter or suspension feeding. And this is what we see, for example, in marine organisms, marine invertebrates, such as mollusks or clams. A lot of these are attached to the subsurface. They're basically just sitting there. They can't move. What they have is they have a series of specialized structures that water passes through, and as the water passes through, they filter out any food particles that might be present in that water. Maybe any phytoplankton that might be within the water, and that's how they consume, that's how they obtain their nutrients. So here we have a picture on the left-hand side of a little clam sitting there, and there's two little things marked in yellow, inhalant siphon, exhalant siphon. The siphons are what they use to bring food in. So the incurrent or the inhalant siphon, they basically suck in the water and they filter out all the food out of the water. And then that water gets removed through their body and sent back out through the exhalant siphon. Some of these filter feeders have what you can think of as little tentacle-like structures, little arm-like structures that help bring or move the food towards their siphons. So here we have an example of gooseneck barnacles. They're filter feeding. These are barnacles with a very, very long sort of attachment to a substrate. And you see the barnacle itself, and all those sort of like little red structures are used to help bring the food towards their inhalant siphon. If you want to watch a video of some, there's a link there of the stock barnacles filter feeding. You can also be a deposit feeder. So this is you feed on food items that occur as deposits. So now instead of being attached to a substrate, you're actually free moving. In the case of the sea cucumber here, you're crawling around on the bottom of the seafloor in the benthic environment. So you're part of the benthos. What happens quite often with seeing the sea cucumber here is you actually ingest the sediment that's on the sea floor. So we have the sediment, bits of grain or grains of sand, grains of maybe biological material, and within that will be food particles. So basically you suck up the sand, it travels through your body, you extract all the nutrients that you need from it, and then you poop sand out on the other end. And this is what we see in the picture on that right. That's sort of that pile in the lower right hand side of the image. That's all sand that's been passed through the sea cucumber's body and then is expelled as waste. Just another little slide sort of showing the differences between filter feeding or suspension feeding and deposit feeding. And then we have carnivorous feeding. So this is what happens. You can be either active or passive. You can actively go out and hunt your food like you see with the shark here and the lionfish, or you just kind of sit around and you wait for the food to come to you and then you eat it. So you capture something and eat it. Very many different methods of eating your food. Sun stars, as you see up here in the right hand corner, what they sometimes do is they extrude their stomach out of the bottom of the star and envelop the fish with it and then basically suck it back in or digest it with some very nasty digestive juices and then bring it back into their body and feed upon it. So there's a whole variety of different methods that carnivores use within the ocean to obtain food and eat it, to consume it. I'll link to yet another video that allows you to watch sea anemones eat. Once again, a very unique method of eating.